Massive Bitcoin crash. We're currently witnessing one of the craziest waves of liquidations we've ever seen with Bitcoin, even bigger than what happened with FTX. Bigger than the Corona crash. I had already recorded the whole video and wanted to report on the Bitcoin crash. And then there was a massive downward swing, and Bitcoin is now crashing even further. If you watch the video, Bitcoin may already be able to scratch around the $90,000 market. I don't know, but right now as I'm recording, we're sitting at a massive $93,000. We've pretty much lost all the gains we made in the last month or two. We've lost it all again. We're seeing a wave of liquidations totaling more than $2 billion. And now comes the actual video that I had recorded earlier, where I dive into the background with the tariffs and what else is coming our way. Bitcoin is falling and is crashing further, and now it's really getting started. Canada wants to respond to the tariffs from Donald Trump with stimulus packages, pumping massive liquidity into the market, similar to what we saw during the pandemic phase. At the same time, Donald Trump says he's far from done, that the EU can also expect massive tariffs. So there's really a trade war that's kicked off here, and we're keeping an eye on the whole thing. And now it's pulling back. It's absolute chaos. And Bitcoin could drop down again. I already mentioned it in the last video. And what happened? The Bitcoin price is dropping massively around this time again. Here it has broken down. But we also need to be careful that we don't panic here. Because, as I said yesterday, this whole thing is just a bear trap. We're not going into a bear market or anything like that. We're just experiencing a short pullback. There's global uncertainty. But then Bitcoin will recover again. And we will definitely pump up to new highs this year. And I'll tell you one more thing, it's actually going to get even better. Because this pullback could potentially be an absolute catalyst for Bitcoin. That means you really can't imagine it right now, when you have the markets like this going down. But there's actually a very, very hyped article right now by Jeff Park, which says the following. Tariffs might just be a temporary measure, but the lasting conclusion is that the Bitcoin price is not just rising, but also faster. So Jeff Park is making the case here, and we'll take a look at that in a second. That through tariffs, Bitcoin benefits in the long run and can actually rise even higher and faster. So that's absolutely crazy. He says here they just haven't realized yet how great a prolonged trade war will be for Bitcoin in the long run. So we have the trade war now, and a lot of people are getting panic, and it's kind of similar to DeepSeek. I also did that in the DeepSeek video. Everyone started to panic. I said, you don't need to panic here. In the long run, AI is good for Bitcoin. AI means that we'll have rising Bitcoin prices in the long run. And now it's exactly the same. We now have the trade war, or the economic war, whatever you want to call it, trade war. We also see that, especially on weekends, people are selling. The strong hands are buying in, or they're happy and just waiting for it to drop, to buy back in. But no, we have a trade war here. And that's good for Bitcoin in the long run, possibly even very, very good. We're going to take a look at that right now. But first, it's really, really interesting to see here. Whoever sold here in the last 90 days. We see that in the last 90 days, especially buyers with over 100 Bitcoin have massively increased their holdings here. But buyers who have less Bitcoin here, so under 1 Bitcoin and so on, they've sold a lot of Bitcoin. And that's exactly what I mean. Hey, don't let this throw you off. The strong hands see this as an opportunity. The weak hands are selling now, they're panicking. We can actually just chill and watch the whole thing. And it's really crazy what's going on here right now. Here it says that Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau is announcing retaliatory tariffs of 25%. So, the USA imposes tariffs, and then Canada strikes back. The same thing will probably happen in other countries. We're also going to talk about Europe and stuff like that in a bit. It's really, really exciting to watch, especially from a geopolitical perspective, what's happening here right now. And now we actually see the Canadian dollar here hitting its lowest point after the US tariffs. It's been falling since 2003, and that's already the first sign why this whole situation is actually very, very bullish in the long run. Because when we have weaker fiat currencies, when we have inflationary fiat currencies, that means we're going to see a rising Bitcoin price. Of course, Bitcoin is initially pulled down by the turmoil. But hey guys, you got to look at the long term. You need to see the bigger picture. Falling fiat currencies, devaluing fiat currencies, nothing better can happen for Bitcoin. And that's exactly what's happening now when they destroy each other. One economic nation after another is tearing each other apart. Then currencies will devalue and Bitcoin will appreciate. Risk assets are going to benefit from this. The stock market is saying it too, the Canadian dollar is crashing, and the Canadian government is reportedly preparing a pandemic-level stimulus package to cushion the impact of the tariffs. And they simply want me to be pessimistic about Bitcoin. And that is exactly that. What I'm saying, hey guys, you need to check out what's going on here. If you switch to bear mode now, you might miss out on a massive turnaround. Of course, it could dip a bit more for a moment. But weak fiat currencies are good for Bitcoin. And Canada is definitely a big player too. Globally, it's no small thing. And accordingly, when such big countries are falling and announcing massive stimulus packages. So not only are interest rates going down, but the stimulus package clearly means. In the pandemic phase, that QE is being practiced here. So they're buying up government bonds from the central banks that maybe no one wants to buy on the open market anymore. And what happens then? Then it's going to be here. It will lead to a massive increase in liquidity. And many people just assume that these trade wars can really put a lot of regions globally in a tight spot. That stimulus packages will be announced here and then actually implemented. In China, something like that could happen too. It's been announced for a long time now. They want to stimulate more here and whatever. But you can't really do it yet because the dollar is still too strong. But if the dollar comes under pressure, then other regions will ramp up their stimulus even more, lowering interest rates, stimulus packages. Announce it, then implement it. And then it will devalue fiat currencies, and Bitcoin will continue to rise here. So you could almost see it that way, as a hedge against trade wars in the long run. Maybe we also need Bitcoin here. So Bitcoin is also a kind of hedge here. But we're going to dive even deeper into it. Why there are still good arguments for Bitcoin right now that are related to the trade wars. There's also an official article here. Trump's tariff threat. Canada is preparing a potential pandemic-level relief plan. The White House says February 1st still stands. So that the sell continues to hold and that preparations are being made here. In Canada, they're really going after the prime ministers. And like I said, printing money is always good for Bitcoin. But you also have to understand that printing money doesn't mean Bitcoin will go up tomorrow, but it means in the next 6 months, in the next 1 or 2 years, depending on when the liquidity comes into the market. Then Bitcoin will go up. Just because money is being printed or bonds are being bought up here, it does not mean that the money is immediately in the. It's not just about the economy circulating, but it takes time for asset prices to rise until there's more inflation and so on. So what's happening here has to be viewed in the long term, not just in the short term. And then there's also a new, exciting statement from Donald Trump. He says here, I'm going to impose tariffs on the European Union. Do you want the honest answer or the political one? And then the reporter says the truthful answer. And then Trump says, for sure he's going to impose tariffs. And then he comes over. And that means the EU is heading even more towards a crash. The EU is already in a nosedive, so it's really intense. What's going on here? Talk to people here again today. Well, I can't introduce you. How many people from the EU are coming to El Salvador? Or they're just fleeing because they're fed up, who just say, hey, I'm done with this whole situation here. The economy is heading for a crash, and I'm basically part of the sinking ship here. I just want to be here to a lifeboat or something like that. Same old discussions I keep having here with people from Germany. But Trump says he wants to massively increase tariffs, on the EU, of course. And that obviously means that the EU is going to have an even harder time. I also took a look at the numbers. For example, now Canada, China, Mexico, and so on. They're basically on a sanctions list from the US here. So not really an embargo, but more like a tariff embargo. That's what I meant. Look, I just got to the beach now. Let's fucking go. Here it actually says at the Cobay Cielet. Mexico's and Canada's exports to the US make up about 78 and 77% of their total annual exports. So you can really see here the US is a massive buyer. I wasn't really aware of that at first. I thought, okay, maybe they can just send their products to other countries. They definitely have other buyers. You can definitely do that to a certain extent. But when you see that such large quantities are being taken here, from Canada, then it's clear that the US has a very, very strong leverage here. Because Canada and Mexico, they can probably still send some exports to other countries. But not all of them, and not really at such good prices as maybe here. The ones they get from the U.S. That's why Canada has a problem here. Mexico has a problem, but the US has a problem again too. Because of course, on the flip side, Canada is also imposing tariffs on the U.S. That's always the thing. The best economy runs on free trade. The more free trade is interrupted, the harder it gets for the one imposing tariffs. but also for the one who has to pay tariffs. And now we actually have a tweet from Jeff Park. So he posted a picture here. And this is just an analyst here who's just analyzing the Bitcoin market. And he has 4 points here. So why is this tariff war actually massively good for Bitcoin? And this will lead to Bitcoin not just rising higher, but will also rise faster. First, he says there's a weakening of the dollar due to tariffs. Similar to a Plaza Accord 2.0 strategy, the attractiveness of alternative assets like Bitcoin could increase in the long run. So that's basically the first point we've already touched on briefly. Then he says here, financial instability, measures like extending debt durations or artificially creating liquidity, for example through increased treasury financing, raise the risk for the dollar and push investors into safer alternatives like Bitcoin. So if, for example, the USA, pressure is put on Canada, tariffs are imposed, the Canadian dollar is under pressure. So then treasury programs might need to be launched. Yeah. Things like the stimulus packages that have been announced, which are probably coming now.
Just what happens here.
People in Bitcoin. This means that the USA is responsible for this, that Bitcoin will now crash downwards due to the panic, but will then be responsible again later. That Bitcoin is going to break out, not just rise, but really break out. Because Canada is likely to get pressured, probably even Mexico, other countries, the EU is probably going to feel the heat too. Then the EU will also have to roll out a stimulus package, and they'll have to print more money. And in the end, the dollar is going to take a hit too. They'll also have to print more money. And then we have the ultimate, let's say, problem here. But it's definitely a fiat problem. That's obviously really, really good for Bitcoin. So first, we have the devaluation of the dollar, second, financial instability, and then inflation and depreciation. That's the third point he brings up. A weakening of the dollar and rising inflation due to tariffs and trade imbalances lead to a flight from fiat currencies. Bitcoin benefits as an inflation-resistant asset and a digital alternative. So that's pretty clear. If we have tariffs here, then prices will go up. When you simply have higher production costs here, if you have a company, suddenly the apple from Canada doesn't cost like €2 anymore, but it costs €2 plus 15% tariff or plus 25% tariff, or how much is added on top. That means the production cost, for example, if you're making apple juice or something like that, will be higher. That's just one example. I don't know if apples are coming from Canada. No idea, probably not. Bad example, the one I chose here. But costs are going up. Inflation is rising. What if inflation rises? People are thinking, what can I do with my money? Is it really great to just leave it in the account? Or am I joining the Bitcoin Hotel YouTuber channel? So please put a subscribe button here too. It's really important that we get traction now and that the canal continues to pick up speed. A big thank you for all the support lately. It's really crazy how we're growing here. So inflation automatically drives people into Bitcoin. That's what I always say, central banks. They're basically the best marketing machines that Bitcoin could ever have. And then he has a fourth point here. Unlike in previous decades, like the 1970s, Bitcoin offers an instantly available digital escape currency. And that's ultimately a good point that he's doing here, that there's now an escape. And back then, it was really tough. Okay, you could maybe flee to gold and stuff, but that wasn't really easy to do, and it wasn't exactly accessible either. It's also tricky to store. What do I know? Transporting, blah, and Bitcoin is now the ultimate escape currency. And that's already a thesis I've often mentioned. That maybe the next big surge in Bitcoin isn't driven by greed, but driven by fear. People are going to flee into Bitcoin because they're afraid of facing the crumbling fiat money, because they're afraid of the crumbling economic system, because they're in uncertainty. Whether we're going to see bigger tariff wars coming, or if there are going to be larger trade wars. Even Larry Fink says that Bitcoin benefits from crises and global uncertainty. And what do we have? We have absolute global uncertainty here. That's increasingly coming up. Additionally, we don't know. A third world war breaks out. Maybe from this trade war, we'll end up with a currency war, and from that currency war, an actual physical war. We don't know any of that. But we know that in times of crisis and turbulence and uncertainty, there is a safe haven. And that safe haven is Bitcoin. And that's why what's happening here is bullish long run for Bitcoin, but no one understands it. So I hope you understand this and that you don't panic. And just here on the weekends, those who end up looking foolish later on, when a Bitcoin is eventually at 120,000, 130,000 US dollars or even higher. And you need to understand.
Because I keep getting asked.
So why are some other YouTubers or whatever causing panic right now? Or why are they saying now, hey, we're heading into a bear market? Or what do I know? You also need to understand that right now, a lot of people have short positions. And I said this in the last video, maybe it's not such a bad idea to bet on falling prices over the next 2 or 3 days. Although I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. I don't do that myself either. I'm not betting against Bitcoin, I'm not that stupid yet. But those people who are short in the market are basically betting on falling prices. They obviously have an interest in selling to you. Hey, it's going short here. They obviously have an interest in scaring you, creating panic. To say, wow, everything is really bad now. And yeah, all of a sudden I'm just not into Bitcoin anymore. I thought Bitcoin was great, but now I think it's bad. You really have to pay close attention here. What's going on here? And that's why, hey guys, don't let them panic you. Buy Bitcoin. Use code Bitcoin for 20% off fees. You can buy Bitcoin easily. Here, with the code Bitcoin, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Absolutely recommended. Here you can buy Bitcoin, whether beginner or advanced. Really great. Buy Bitcoin. I've only gotten good feedback so far, right? Feel free to tell me in the comments below how satisfied you are with 21 Bitcoin, whether you're happy with it or not. Guys, see you. Peace out.